Chapter 2. Do not listen alone. I spent the next 2 decades sitting in a small, poorly lit office on the industrial side of town, working as a private investigator. I didn't take cases about cheating spouses or corporate fraud. I took the cases that no one else wanted. I worked for the desperate families who simply refused to accept the word missing. My office walls are covered from floor to ceiling in photographs of the lost. They are the unaccounted for. When I sit at my desk, dozens of smiling faces look down at me from behind layers of corkboard and red string. There are hikers in bright North Face jackets, amateur photographers, and weekend campers. I look at their frozen smiles, and I try to convince myself that most of them are just tragic casualties of the wild. A slipped boot on a wet rock, a sudden drop in body temperature, a fatal miscalculation in navigation. I tell myself it is just the cruel mathematics of nature. I tell myself that so I can sleep at night. But last Tuesday, the air in my office completely changed. It was a miserable autumn evening. The rain was coming down in sheets, drumming a relentless heavy rhythm against the single window behind my desk. A package arrived. It was wrapped in thick brown butcher paper that was damp from the storm and smelled faintly of wet earth and old pine needles. I turned the box over in my hands. There was no return address. The postage stamp was heavily faded, but the ink cancellation mark was still legible. It was postmarked from a small isolated logging town up in the northern ranges. A town that, according to the state registry, has not had a working post office in over 5 years. I took my pocket knife and sliced through the heavy packing tape. Inside the box, resting on a bed of crumpled newspaper, was a laminated university identification card. The edges of the plastic were chewed up, and the barcode was stained with something dark and oily. The name printed next to the photograph read Marcus Evans. He was listed as a professor of geology. My stomach tied itself into a cold, hard knot. I knew that name. Everyone in my line of work knew that name. Marcus Evans had gone missing 3 weeks ago. He had parked his Subaru at a trailhead, walked into the dense tree line, and never returned. And he had vanished at Blackwater Ridge. The official police report, signed off by the very search and rescue department I used to command, stated that the professor had likely lost his bearings in a sudden fog bank and succumbed to the elements. Case closed. Another tragedy of the wild. But tucked directly behind his plastic ID card, wrapped in a piece of dirty flannel cloth, was something that the police definitely did not find in the woods. It was an old, heavy-duty Maxell audio cassette tape. The white label on the front of the tape was covered in handwriting. The letters were shaky, deeply indented into the paper, and completely frantic. It looked like the writing of a man who was shivering uncontrollably, or a man who was looking over his shoulder while holding the pen. It read, "Do not listen alone." I sat there in my heavy leather chair for a long time, staring at the plastic casing. The rain continued drumming against my window, isolating me from the rest of the town. I pulled a dusty cassette player from my bottom drawer, placed the tape inside, and pushed the heavy mechanical play button. There was a loud click, and then the speaker filled the room with a heavy, thick tape hiss. For the first 30 seconds, there was no speaking. There was only the sound of a man trying and failing to control his panic. I heard the sound of ragged, heavy breathing. In the background, beneath the static, I could hear the distinct, brittle crunch of dry leaves and twigs. Then, Marcus's voice broke through the noise. It was thin. It was brittle. It was completely hollowed out by terror.
"It's day 4.
He whispered into the microphone, his voice barely rising above a coarse croak.
"I've stayed in the tent, just like the old man at the supply station told me to do."
He continued, pausing to swallow hard.
"But the birds, They have been totally silent for 6 hours.
He stopped talking. The tape hissed. If you have spent any time in the deep woods, you know exactly what he meant. A forest is never truly quiet. There is always the rustle of squirrels, the chirp of insects, the distant call of a crow. When a forest goes dead silent, it means every single living creature in the vicinity is holding its breath. It means an apex predator has entered the area.
The silence out here is so loud, it is literally ringing in my ears.
Marcus whispered.
I can hear something circling the clearing.
I leaned closer to the speaker, the hair on my arm standing straight up.
It is heavy.
Marcus breathed, his voice trembling.
But it doesn't make the sound of a bear walking. It sounds like wood. It sounds like heavy, ancient wood scraping against wood.
And then, on the recording, bleeding through the cheap speaker of my tape deck, I heard it. A whistle. It was incredibly high-pitched, rhythmic, and melodic. It didn't sound like a man whistling through his pursed lips. It sounded sharp and hollow, as if the air was being blown forcefully through a hollowed-out piece of bone. The whistle echoed off the trees on the recording, bouncing back from multiple directions at once. But the most terrifying part of the tape wasn't the bone whistle. It was what came immediately after the whistling stopped. A voice called out from the dark woods outside the professor's tent. And that voice sounded exactly, flawlessly, like Marcus Evans. It was a perfect mimicry. The pitch, the tone, the slight academic accent, it was all identical to the man whispering into the recorder. But it echoed through the trees with a flat, emotionless, dead cadence.
Marcus.
The voice in the woods called out.
Come outside. I found the stone you were looking for.
Inside the tent, the real Marcus began to sob. It was a pathetic, broken sound. The sound of a rational mind snapping in half.
That is my voice.
He whispered to the tape recorder, crying uncontrollably.
That's my voice. But I am in here. I'm right here.
The tape hissed for another tense, unbearable minute. Then, the microphone picked up a distinct, agonizingly slow sound. The sound of a nylon tent zipper being pulled open from the outside, and after that, 20 minutes of absolute, crushing nothingness. 20 minutes of nothing but the wind howling through the Blackwater pines, until the tape ran out of reel and clicked to a stop. I sat there in the dark of my office for a very long time. The rain continued to beat against the glass. I reached across my desk, opened a small wooden box, and picked up my brother Toby's old brass compass. The metal was cold against my palm. Marcus Evans did not mail this tape to my office. Marcus Evans was dead, or he was something far worse than dead. Someone or something else had packaged this cassette, walked out of the forest, and mailed it to me. It knows who I am. It wants me to come back to the ridge. It wants to finish the story that began on that humid summer afternoon in 1994. My name is Samuel Cochrane, and I am packing my gear. I am going back into the trees. If you are listening to this recording, I need you to do exactly as I say. Keep your curtains tightly closed. Keep your porch lights on. Because the Appalachian Mountains are hungry tonight, and they have finally remembered my name.